Have you ever wondered what happened after the fall of Lucifer? We all know the story. Lucifer, once an angel of light, rebelled against God, and as a result, he and his followers were cast down to earth. But what about the angels who stayed loyal to God? What did they do when rebellion threatened the very fabric of heaven? The Bible tells us about the great war in the heavens, but few speak of what came after the battle was won. There's one angel, one whose role was more than just to fight. His name is Michael, and his task was not to destroy, but to restore order. Picture the scene, the chaos in the heavens, the angels still reeling from Lucifer's betrayal, and yet, amid this destruction, Michael stood silent. A silence that wasn't empty, but full of purpose. We often think of silence as the absence of sound, but sometimes it's the quiet before the storm, waiting for the right moment to act. Michael wasn't just standing still. He was watching, waiting, understanding the weight of every decision. In the calm, he was holding on to the justice of God, knowing that when the time came, it would be executed not with wrath, but with divine authority. The silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation for what was to come. This was Michael's mission, to restore what had been broken, to lock away those who had rebelled, and to secure the universe from further chaos. But how did he do it? What if I told you that the greatest victory Michael ever achieved was not through the swing of a sword, but through the imprisonment of the fallen angels? Not in chains of iron, but in a place where time does not exist, and their pride was the key that held them captive. Stay with me as we unfold the story of how Michael, the great warrior of God's army, executed justice. Not with violence, but with a wisdom far beyond our understanding. And in this journey, there's more than just a lesson on angels. There's a lesson on patience, on discernment, and on the true power of God's justice. Let's dive into the hidden truths of the Bible, where silence holds power, and where justice is not just an act, but a reflection of God's eternal plan. In the moments following Lucifer's fall, chaos swept through the heavens like a storm breaking the calm. The rebellion was not just a political or personal failure, it was an eternal breach in the divine order. Yet in the midst of the raging war, there was a figure standing still, observing, waiting. This figure was none other than Michael, the Archangel. While many of the celestial beings, those who had not fallen, were either in shock or eager to engage in battle, Michael chose a different path. He did not rush in with a sword raised, nor did he cry out in anger. No, Michael stood in silence, waiting for the right moment to act. You see, in the Bible, silence is not always the absence of sound. Sometimes it's the presence of something far more powerful. In the midst of cosmic chaos, the stillness of Michael was filled with purpose, a silence that carried the weight of divine strategy. Michael knew something many others did not. The moment to act must not be rushed. For in the grand plan of God, every movement was not just a response, but a decision that would echo through eternity. The heavens did not move on impulse, they moved with purpose. Let's consider, for a moment, the power of divine silence. How many times in our own lives have we found ourselves in moments of chaos, wondering where God is, why he seems silent? We pray, we seek, and yet it feels as though heaven is distant. But what if, like Michael, this silence is not an absence but a preparation? What if, during these moments, God is not inactive, but waiting for the perfect time to reveal his plan? This silence is not to be feared, but understood as part of the greater tapestry that God is weaving in our lives. The Bible gives us numerous examples of divine silence before great actions. One of the most striking moments comes before the Great Exodus. For generations, the Israelites were enslaved, their cries reaching heaven, Yet for a time God did not respond in the way they expected. He did not immediately deliver them from their tormentors, and many must have wondered why. But when the time was right, God acted with such power that it shook the earth, parted the Red Sea, and led his people to freedom. Just as in that moment of divine silence, Michael's silence was not a lack of action, but a holding of divine power, waiting for the right time to bring justice to those who had fallen. In the same way, the moments when we feel most abandoned or lost in the silence of God are often the moments when He is at work in ways we cannot yet see. The Lord's timing is perfect, and the silence we experience is not God's neglect, but His careful, deliberate action behind the scenes. Imagine Michael, standing in the midst of the storm, not with a sword raised, but with a heart full of discernment. He was not acting out of impulse or haste. He was waiting for the divine signal, the moment when God's plan would unfold. In this silence, Michael was aligning himself with God's perfect will, ready to execute justice, but only when it was in alignment with the greater divine purpose. It was not just about stopping the rebellion, but about restoring the order of the heavens. And this is where we can learn something truly profound. In our own lives, how often do we rush to fix situations, to make our voices heard, to take action because we feel the need to do something in the face of chaos? Michael shows us that sometimes the most powerful action we can take is to wait with purpose, to wait with faith, knowing that God's silence does not mean He is absent. The silence is His preparation, and in it, He is strengthening us to carry out His will at the right moment. This lesson is not just a theological point about angels, it is deeply personal. Many of us face moments in life when we feel overwhelmed by the storm, when everything around us seems to be in disarray. We pray for relief, for direction, for answers, and yet there is silence. But what if that silence is not God's absence? What if it's the silence before the action, the moment of divine strategy unfolding in ways we cannot yet comprehend? Just like Michael, we must learn to stand firm in the silence, trusting that God is at work behind the scenes. And here's the challenge: to recognize that this silence is not a void, but a space filled with purpose. Just as Michael stood, waiting for the divine moment to act, so too are we called to wait for God's timing in our own lives. The danger, of course, is in confusing silence with abandonment. It's easy to feel that because we cannot hear God's voice in the moment, He is not there. But that is not the truth. The truth is that God's timing is perfect, and His silence is often the space in which He is preparing us for something greater. Now, as we reflect on Michael's role, it becomes clear that this silence was not just a passive waiting. It was an active, intense focus. Michael was not idle. He was preparing, discerning, watching the unfolding of the heavenly drama with a heart full of divine wisdom. The stillness he held was charged with anticipation, not of destruction, but of divine restoration. And so, as we move forward in our own spiritual journeys, let us learn from Michael. Let us learn to embrace the silence, not as a sign of God's absence, but as a space in which He is preparing us for action. Let us wait with faith, knowing that even in silence, God is at work. For when the time comes, as it always does, we will move not out of haste, but with the precision of divine purpose, just as Michael did. In the next part of our journey, we will see how Michael's silence gave way to a powerful and decisive action, not to destroy, but to restore, how the very stillness of heaven was the precursor to a divine justice that could not be undone. But for now, let us reflect on the quiet spaces in our own lives, where God is preparing us for what comes next. And as we wait, let us trust that He is at work, and that His silence is anything but empty. It is full of purpose, full of power, and full of love. So, as we walk through our own times of waiting, let us remember Michael and the lesson he teaches us. That silence is not the absence of God, but the moment in which He is preparing us to step into the fullness of His divine plan. Trust in the silence, for it is the precursor to something greater. When the battle in the heavens was won, and Lucifer, the leader of the fallen angels, was cast down to earth, there was still much work to be done. The war had left its mark, and Michael the Archangel was not only a warrior, but a divine executor of justice. But what many do not realize is that Michael's greatest act of justice did not come with a sword raised in fury, nor with a battle cry to announce victory. His greatest act was the sealing of the fallen angels, not in death, but in eternal confinement. This idea of confinement might seem strange at first. After all, we often associate justice with punishment, with destruction, and with the immediate annihilation of evil. But Michael's actions speak to a deeper, more profound understanding of divine justice. It was not about destroying the fallen angels, it was about restoring order. It was about making sure that the rebellion would not continue, that the chaos of the heavens would not spread into the cosmos. And so Michael sealed the fallen angels away, not with chains of iron or physical force, but with bonds of divine authority that could not be undone. Imagine this: the angels who had once been in the presence of God, who had known the fullness of His glory, were now bound not only physically but spiritually. Their pride had led them to rebellion, and their punishment was not simply physical imprisonment, but spiritual isolation. Michael, with the full authority of heaven, sealed them in places where time did not exist, where sound did not echo, and where they would be forced to confront their own sin for all eternity. This was not an act of vengeance. Michael did not seek to destroy them. He did not act out of anger or retribution. Rather, he acted out of a desire to restore balance, to bring about justice that was not based on violence, but on purpose. He bound the angels in such a way that they would face the consequences of their actions, not in the form of quick destruction, but in the form of eternal awareness. And this is where the depth of divine justice becomes clear. For Michael, the idea of restoring order was not about eradicating the fallen angels, but about ensuring that their rebellion would never again influence the universe. Imagine being locked away in a place where you are eternally conscious of your choices, where there is no escape from the reality of your actions. The angels were not annihilated. They were made to endure the eternal weight of their pride. It was a punishment far worse than death, the awareness that they would never again be part of the divine plan, that they would forever live in the knowledge of their fall. In the Bible, we see many examples of God's justice that are not about quick destruction, but are about long-lasting consequences. For instance, in the story of Cain and Abel, Cain murders his brother Abel, and while he is not killed in return, he is marked and cast out. His punishment is not instant death, but a life of wandering, unable to find peace. Similarly, when the people of Israel turned away from God and worshipped idols, they faced not immediate destruction, but the consequences of their actions: exile, suffering, and loss. This is a theme that runs throughout the scriptures. God's justice is often about allowing people to live with the weight of their decisions, to reflect on their actions, and to face the consequences of their choices. And just like Cain, or the Israelites, or the fallen angels, we too are subject to the consequences of our choices. The idea of confinement that Michael enacted on the fallen angels serves as a reminder to us all that our actions have lasting consequences. God's justice does not always come in the form of swift destruction. Sometimes It is a slow revelation, where we are given time to reflect and understand the gravity of our decisions. The punishment of the fallen angels was not just about locking them away, but about ensuring that their rebellion would never again be able to spread, to corrupt, or to harm the created order. But there is something else here that is crucial for us to understand. This act of confinement was not just for the angels, it was also for us. It was a reminder that evil, while it may seem to triumph in the short term, will never prevail in the long run. Michael's sealing of the fallen angels away shows us that no matter how much chaos is sown in the world, God's justice will ultimately restore order. Evil may seem to reign for a time, but it is never permanent. And this is where hope lies. In our own lives, we may feel like we are surrounded by injustice, by evil that seems to have the upper hand. But the story of Michael and the fallen angels teaches us that God's justice is at work, even when we don't see it. Just as Michael waited for the right time to act, God is waiting for the perfect moment to bring his justice to bear. And when that moment comes, it will not be about destruction, but about restoration. It will not be about eradicating evil in a moment of wrath, but about confining it in such a way that it can never again have the power to harm. Think of the times in your own life when you have faced hardship, when it felt like evil was winning. Perhaps it was a betrayal, an injustice, or a season of suffering. But remember this: the silence, the waiting, the moments when it feels like nothing is happening. These are not moments of abandonment. These are moments when God is at work, when his justice is being prepared to break forth at the right time. Just as Michael waited, so too must we wait, knowing that the justice of God will come. And so, as we reflect on Michael's actions, we are reminded that true justice is not about destruction. It is about restoration. It is about bringing things back into alignment with God's divine plan. Michael did not act out of rage. He acted out of love, for the order of creation, for the protection of the universe, and for the ultimate restoration of all things. His sealing of the fallen angels was an act of love as much as it was an act of justice. And this is the kind of justice we must seek in our own lives. It is not about retribution or vengeance. It is about restoration, healing, and the slow, steady work of bringing all things into alignment with God's will. Michael's work is not finished, and neither is ours. The task of bringing justice to the world continues, but it is a justice that brings restoration, not destruction. And just as Michael sealed the fallen angels away, so too must we seal away the evils in our own lives, trusting that God's justice will ultimately bring all things to their rightful place. As we move forward, let us learn from Michael. Let us understand that justice is not always immediate or violent, but it is always purposeful and redemptive. Let us wait for the right time to act, knowing that God's justice will bring the restoration of all things. And let us trust that in the end, evil will not have the final say. God's justice, like Michael's, will always prevail. When we think of the Nephilim, we are often confronted with a mysterious and unsettling image. Giants, born of the union between the fallen angels and human women, a hybrid race that embodied the consequences of defying the divine order. Their story, though mentioned briefly in Genesis, holds profound implications not just for the world they inhabited, but for all of humanity. The Nephilim were more than just giants. They were living proof of the catastrophic effects that occur when heavenly laws are broken, when sacred boundaries are crossed. Let's consider the moment when the Watchers, those angelic beings tasked with guarding humanity, chose to break their divine oath. In their rebellion, they descended to earth and took human wives. This act was not only a violation of their heavenly purpose, but it also disrupted the natural order that God had ordained. By marrying human women and fathering children with them, the Watchers created a race of beings, the Nephilim, who were neither fully angelic nor fully human. This union was forbidden, and it left a permanent scar on the fabric of creation. The Bible says that these Nephilim were mighty men, men of renown, but they were also creatures of insatiable desire, with an overwhelming hunger for power, destruction, and domination. Their presence on earth did not bring about peace or harmony. Instead, it unleashed chaos, corruption, and violence upon humanity. The Nephilim's appetite for destruction was boundless. At first, they consumed the crops and animals, but as they grew, their hunger turned toward humans themselves. Entire villages and families were wiped out as the Nephilim ravaged the land, seeing people not as equals, but as mere prey to satisfy their insatiable cravings. What can we learn from the Nephilim, and what consequences did their existence bring? One of the most profound lessons lies in the nature of rebellion. When the Watchers broke the sacred rule of God and mingled with humanity, they disrupted the divine order, a boundary that had been set to protect creation. The Nephilim were the physical manifestation of this breach. Their very existence, as a hybrid of divine and human, was a direct contradiction to the order that God had established. But it wasn't just the Nephilim who suffered. Humanity, too, faced the repercussions of this unholy union. As these giants grew in power and violence, they began to corrupt the earth itself, and the cries of the oppressed reached heaven. The earth, once flourishing and peaceful, became a battlefield, one where even the mightiest of men stood little chance against the hunger of these monstrous beings. The beauty of creation was marred, and the hope of humanity seemed to fade as the Nephilim's terror spread. The Bible tells us that during this time, God saw the wickedness of mankind had become great on the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. It was in response to this great evil that God decided to send the flood. The flood was not just a judgment on the Nephilim, but on the corruption that they had brought to the earth. This was a moment of divine cleansing, a reset, where the floodwaters would wash away the defilement and restore the earth to its original purpose. But what does this ancient story tell us about our own world today? We live in a time when the boundaries of moral and spiritual law are often crossed, when people, institutions, and even entire cultures break away from the sacred order that God established. The Nephilim serve as a warning of the dangers that arise when we stray too far from divine intent. They remind us that our actions, especially when they defy God's purpose, have consequences, not just for us, but for the world around us. We see in the story of the Nephilim the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of turning away from God's design. The Nephilim were creatures of violence and self-indulgence, and their insatiable thirst for more led to their ultimate destruction. In many ways, they are a symbol of the corruption that occurs when humanity abandons its moral compass in pursuit of power, pleasure, or personal gain. The world around us today is filled with similar temptations, ideologies, systems, and practices that challenge divine boundaries and push us toward destruction. Just as the Nephilim wreaked havoc on the earth, so too do the forces of evil in our world seek to undermine the divine order. But the story of the Nephilim also shows us that there is hope. Even in the midst of great evil and darkness, God's plan remains intact. Just as He sent the flood to cleanse the earth and restore His order, He continues to work behind the scenes in our world today, offering us a way to return to His divine will. This brings us to the question of how we, as individuals, can learn from the Nephilim's tragic fall. The first lesson is clear. We must respect the boundaries set by God. We are created to live in harmony with the divine order, and when we step outside of that order, we bring chaos not only to our own lives, but to the world around us. The Nephilim remind us of the dangers of pride, of the desire to transcend our limitations and take what does not belong to us. Their story calls us to humility, to recognize that we are not meant to break the laws of God, but to live within them and submit ourselves to His will. Another important lesson is the need for discernment. In our world today, there are many ideas, movements, and practices that seek to blur the lines between good and evil, truth and deception. Just as the Nephilim were a direct result of the angels' failure to discern the limits of their roles, so too must we be careful not to be swayed by the false promises of power, control, and pleasure that the world offers. We are called to exercise wisdom, to know what is right, and to reject what leads to destruction. Lastly, the story of the Nephilim is a reminder of the importance of divine restoration. While the Nephilim were a result of great evil, the flood brought about the possibility of new beginnings. In our lives, when we find ourselves in the aftermath of our own mistakes or the corruption around us, we can trust that God offers a way to restore us, just as He did with Noah and his family. The flood was a moment of divine judgment, but it was also a moment of divine mercy, a chance for humanity to start again, to rebuild, and to return to the path that God had set before them. As we reflect on the Nephilim and the consequences of breaking God's laws, let us remember that the boundaries He sets for us are not burdensome or restrictive, but protective. They are designed to keep us safe, to keep the world in balance, and to allow us to live in the peace that comes from aligning ourselves with His will. May we learn from the Nephilim's tragic fall and strive to live in harmony with the divine order, trusting in God's wisdom and justice to guide us through the challenges of life. In the end, the Nephilim teach us that the consequences of rebellion are far-reaching, but so too is the grace of God, which offers us the opportunity for restoration and redemption. May we never forget the lessons they left behind. When the floodwaters receded and the world began to dry, a new chapter began in human history. The world was no longer the same. The earth, which had once been corrupted by the violence and wickedness of the Nephilim, was now cleansed by the flood, and it was time for a fresh start. Yet even in the aftermath of such a profound disaster, one thing was certain: Michael's work was far from over. His role in restoring order, in ensuring the divine plan would continue, was still unfolding. The flood had served as a moment of divine judgment, a cleansing of the earth from the defilement brought by the fallen angels and the Nephilim. It was a dramatic act, one that eradicated the chaos and corruption that had plagued humanity. But it was also a moment of divine mercy. For Noah and his family, the flood was both a punishment for the wicked and a protection for the righteous. It was a second chance, a new beginning. And yet, in the silence that followed the flood, Michael's work continued in ways that were not immediately visible. Michael's actions during and after the flood provide us with a deeper understanding of how divine justice works, not as an act of vengeance, but as a long-term process of restoration. While many would have assumed that the flood was the final act of God's judgment, the reality was that the battle between good and evil was far from over. The Nephilim may have been destroyed, their influence wiped from the face of the earth, but the consequences of their existence lingered. Even though the giants were gone, their legacy remained, carried in the hearts of those who lived through the corruption they caused. But what happened to the fallen angels who had fathered the Nephilim? After the flood, they were not simply forgotten. No, Michael's work was not just about defeating evil in one grand battle. It was about ensuring that the evil of rebellion would never rise again. And so, Michael continued to work, not just in the heavens, but in the spiritual realms, sealing away the fallen angels and ensuring that their influence would never again threaten the world. The Bible doesn't give us many details about Michael's actions after the flood, but we can infer from the overall narrative that his task was far from complete. The Bible speaks of Michael as the protector of Israel, and it is clear that he played a pivotal role in guarding the divine order, even after the flood. His silence during the flood was not an absence of action, but a strategic move, waiting for the right time to act. The flood had cleansed the earth, but the spiritual battle was ongoing, and Michael, standing in his divine authority, knew that his mission was to ensure that the mistakes of the past would not repeat themselves. Imagine, for a moment, the weight of Michael's responsibility. After the flood, the earth was a blank slate. Humanity had been given a new beginning, but the threat of corruption still loomed. The Nephilim were gone, but their legacy was written into the very fabric of human history. Evil, while temporarily subdued, was still present in the world. The battle for the hearts and minds of humanity had just begun. And so, Michael, as a guardian of divine justice, continued to watch over the earth, waiting for the signs that evil would try to rise again. One of the most striking aspects of Michael's role after the flood is the way in which divine justice operates over time. God's judgment is not always instantaneous. Often it is a process that unfolds gradually, and it is during this process that Michael's role becomes clearer. He does not rush into action. Rather, he waits for the moment when justice will be fully revealed, ensuring that the evil that lurks in the world is dealt with appropriately. In the aftermath of the flood, the world was given a chance to heal, to rebuild, and to return to the purpose for which it was created. But the presence of evil was never far away. It could be seen in the hearts of men who still turned away from God, in the continuing struggles between good and evil. And so, Michael's task was to ensure that, even as the world healed, the threat of rebellion would never rise again. This brings us to an important lesson. Divine justice is not always about immediate, visible action. Often, it is about the quiet, unseen work that takes place behind the scenes, in the spiritual realm. Just as Michael did not immediately destroy the fallen angels, but instead seal them away, so too does God's justice unfold in ways we cannot always see. It is a slow process, but one that will ultimately bring about the restoration of all things. In our own lives, we can sometimes feel as though the flood of adversity is overwhelming. We may wonder why God's justice seems delayed, why the world still seems to be full of chaos and corruption. But the story of Michael's actions after the flood teaches us that even in times of silence, God is at work. He is preparing the world for the eventual restoration, ensuring that evil will never again have the power to corrupt and destroy. And while we may not always see it, we can trust that His justice is unfolding in ways that are beyond our understanding. As we reflect on Michael's role after the flood, we are reminded that divine justice is not just about the immediate consequences of sin, but about the long-term restoration of creation. Michael did not rush to destroy the fallen angels, but he sealed them away in such a way that they would never again influence the world. And this is how God works in our lives as well. He doesn't always act immediately or in ways we can see, but His justice is sure. It is a justice that brings healing, restoration, and ultimately, peace. The flood was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. And even after the flood waters had receded, Michael's work continued, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. As we face our own challenges, we can take comfort in knowing that God's justice is at work in our lives. even when we cannot see it. Just as he restored the world after the flood, he is at work restoring us, healing our hearts, and preparing us for the ultimate victory over evil. Let this be a reminder that, even in the silence after the storm, God's justice is unfolding. Like Michael, we must trust in the process, knowing that while evil may seem to have its moment, God's divine order will always prevail. The flood was a sign of God's judgment, but it was also a sign of His mercy, His desire to restore, and His commitment to bringing about the fullness of His kingdom. And as we continue on our own journeys, we can trust that His justice will bring restoration to us all. As we draw near to the conclusion of this incredible journey through the hidden depths of biblical history, I want to leave you with something to reflect on. We've uncovered truths that many overlook, the mighty actions of Michael the Archangel and the consequences of the fallen angel's rebellion. These stories are more than just ancient tales. They are powerful lessons about divine justice, restoration, and the eternal battle between good and evil. If there's one thing we can take from this, it's the understanding that God's timing is perfect. Just as Michael waited for the exact moment to act, we too must learn to wait on God's timing in our own lives. The world we live in often feels like it's spiraling out of control, just like the chaos that reigned in heaven before the great flood. But the reality is this: God's justice is moving in the unseen, preparing the world for the ultimate victory over evil. And Michael, the great warrior of heaven, is not just a myth or a character of the past. He is still active, still fighting, still guarding, and most importantly, still watching over us. His silence, his waiting, his careful decisions to act only when the time is right. They show us the depth of God's perfect wisdom and the power of patience in the face of evil. In the flood, we saw a clear demonstration of divine justice, a cleansing, a fresh start. But what we must remember is that the flood was not just a story of wrath, it was a moment of mercy. It was an opportunity for renewal, a chance for creation to breathe again, and a reminder that even in our darkest times, God is working. Just like Noah and his family were saved from the destruction, we too are given chances for redemption. This is the story of the Nephilim, of Michael, of rebellion, and of restoration. These are not just ancient stories, they are living truths that speak directly to our lives today. In every battle we face, in every moment of doubt, God's justice, just like Michael's, will always prevail. We may not always understand the ways in which God works, but we can trust that His silence is not absence, and His timing is always right. The lessons of the fallen angels, the Nephilim, and Michael's unwavering commitment to God's plan are here to teach us that even in our struggles, there is purpose. Even when it feels like evil is winning, God is preparing for the perfect moment when His justice will sweep across the earth and restore all things. So, as you reflect on this powerful story, take a moment to think about your own life. What areas of your life are you struggling to understand? Are there moments when it feels like evil has the upper hand? Remember, just as Michael waited and acted with purpose, we too must trust that God's timing in our own lives is always perfect. The battle may seem long, but the victory is already certain. And as we await that final victory, let's hold fast to the truths we've uncovered today. Let's remember that we are not alone in this fight. Just as Michael watches over God's plan, so too does God watch over each of us. His justice will prevail, His mercy is everlasting, and His purpose is unfolding, even when we can't see it. If this story spoke to your heart, if you feel inspired by the strength and patience of Michael, then don't forget to like this video. Hit that like button so others can hear these truths too. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you can be part of this incredible journey into the mysteries of the Bible. There's so much more to uncover, so many hidden truths that will change the way you see the world, and you don't want to miss it. As we continue to explore the depths of God's Word and the lessons of the archangels, remember, you are not alone in your struggles. God's justice, like the silence before the storm, is working even now to bring about the restoration of all things. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need encouragement in the battle. The message of divine justice and mercy is one that the world needs to hear. So, let's stand together, trust in God's plan, and know that just as Michael fought for heaven's order, we are called to fight for his kingdom here on earth. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to dive even deeper into these truths with you in the next video. Until then, stay strong in your faith, and remember, God's justice is always at work, and he is preparing something greater than we can imagine.